Hey everybody, I'm Deez. This is my workshop. Welcome back. Today is going to be the start of the video where I am reassembling the lathe. I have got my original pulley back with the modifications to it in order to mount to the lathe, and hopefully it's going to solve a lot of those problems where that pulley was moving. In the last video on this topic, it was a montage of the conversations, things like that we had with Dave and I to come up with this solution. He came up with the solution. I provided him all the dimensions and things like that he needed as he needed them. He drew up a final plan. If anybody's interested in that, if you're running in the same boat, he really measured everything out nice and as close and accurate as he possibly could. Better than I could have done, and drew it up. So these are available if anybody needs them. He sent back the original pulley. We got the package today. We're going to open this together, and in this video we're going to finish any of the operations that need to occur with the mounting block and the components that he sent, and we're going to get them on the lathe, and I'm anxious to get that lathe back in operation. So let's open this box to start this video out and get started with this thing. Hopefully this solves all the problems that we were having. Let's get this box opened up. There's some tape on there. That might be too much. All right, what did we get here? He sent the original, this is part of my original components, the bolt, the adjustment screw mechanism, a piece of the belt that he bought for testing. He bought a really long version of this belt. It sure does look the same, and he used that in order to test his grooves on the pulley he made. He just sent it as a sample for me to check. Sent a couple extra needle bearings. Let's open this up. So here's the original pieces that are for the original pulley. This bolt and this nut and these washers all were part of that original setup. Set those aside. The needle bearings, that's the new setup that he's working on. He sent a couple extras in case I need them, and that's very much appreciated. And then here's that sample belt that is very similar to the one. I'll have to compare that to the originals. And then he sent pieces. We will use those. I'm not going to take those out. A couple C-clips for the old setup as well. We'll set this aside for now. Yeah, he had an extra gauge block that he shared with me. I'll do some measurements with that, but this is unrelated to the project. He just threw that in the box. Thank you, Dave. Set this aside. All right, let's see what we got here. Here's the small. Okay, this is my original setup as well, and it's all part of this. So this actually would go through there like that, and then this would mount on there. So there's the original. Again, the point was to not modify all of the components to where I couldn't reuse them later on as they originally were. Here is, okay, so here is the new mounting system that Dave came up with. Very good. Nice hard block of steel. Just needs milled, which I'm going to take care of. He's already got this mounted on here. And yeah, so then we need to get this drilled and tapped so we can mount it to, with the bolt, to the mounting plate that's on the side of the lathe. That when everything's pushed up against the pulley, that's going to spin really nice. This should really improve the stability of that mounting system. Very nice. So I got some work to do on this block to finish it out. And then finally, this should be the original pulley. Yep, this is my original pulley. This piece will slip in here. this block will mount like that. So if we take that off, just do a quick test fit. I need to put flats in this mounting rod as well. But that's the idea, is for this to, this would slide in here. Then this is going to mount on there, but before that we put in these pieces. This is that thrust bearing that he shared. So when that slides on there, there's very little friction. This will screw on here and snug everything down, and that thing should spin beautifully, and it does. There's no wobble. So I'm looking forward to getting this thing mounted. There's the parts that he sent. Like I said, it requires some finishing. He said, he asked if I would handle that. I said, certainly. It'll give me, at least I can say I helped out a little bit. I think this is overall going to be a really great improvement to the design. Thanks again, Dave, and we're going to get started with this. Before we get on with installing and milling out these parts, I want to review this. What this is the bearing that I sent him that was really loose, the inside bearing. There was 2 of them, and so he took apart the other one that was in that pulley that I mailed out, and this is what was inside. So he was just examining the inside of that bearing. I thought you just wanted to see that, but there's the inside race for that other pulley or other bearing, and then of course the ball bearings. He just thought he'd throw those in there so I could take a look at them. All right, everybody, welcome back here. We're gonna take a closer peek at the pulley system that was sent. I'm gonna reuse my adjustment mechanism. No need to remake that. Of course, it's a pretty simple piece. I could, but there's no need to remake that. So we'll reuse that one. The block that was sent needs to have a drilled and tapped hole. So instead of this design where there will be a through hole for the mounting bolt to go through, it's what I'm going to attempt to do is thread straight into this block. So this would come in from the inside of the headstock and just thread into this block. So rather than trying to get something back in here to tighten a nut onto, I'm going to attempt to be able to just tighten it up from inside the headstock rather than battle 2 different a nut and a bolt. If that doesn't work, of course I can drill this out to where it's a through hole, but first I'm going to try to drill and tap it. Again, this is a pretty simple piece. I could always remake this if I mess it up, so that's good there. I do believe I'm going to have to mill this down a little bit, maybe the width of one of these ribs. I'll show you. We'll get you over to the lathe, about 50 thou, I think, and I'll show you why. And we expected that. I also want to clean up the edges just and deburr them, just to clean up the part, but otherwise it's ready to go. Just got a few operations to do on this piece, and I was doing some measurements, and the intent is to put this sleeve in here, so I have 2 thrust bearings, or needle bearings, and that are farther apart, and when this mounting rod goes through here, there's no room really for this thing to rock. It's just solid. And then the idea actually was to put the thrust bearing on here, and that way the pulley won't have any friction as it's mounted here. It just goes. It's nice. And then this will thread into here, and that will mount to the lathe like this. And we'll use a nylon locking nut to screw all that together, and that's how it will be. So the operations that I need to do to complete this project is to drill and tap a hole on this side for mounting, similar to this, but we're going to go smaller and tap it. And then mill some flats on this rod so that I can tighten it down to this block. So I want 2 flats on this round boss here, and get it over there and mounted. Okay, so I've got all this mocked up and as designed. I'm not going to use this nylon locking flange nut. It's too long, but just for the sake of mock-up, I wanted to do that. And what I'm doing is just pressing this block where it's going to be. It's going to be flat up against this mounting plate, and that's where I need this small portion of the pulley to line up with this big portion, and this big portion lines up with the actual motor pulley at the bottom. And we're off by a whole section of pulley. And I was thinking, well, what did I get wrong here? Well, if I take out this flange nut and we take this thrust bearing out, then we put all this back, mock up the thrust bearings on the front, which maybe I misunderstood, but maybe this is the intention that Dave had. But if we mock that up, it's still going to spin okay. It's still going to do its thing. And then when we mock this up, we are, and I'll bring you over here on the front, we're basically to where this outside rib and this inside rib are lined up. So we actually need to shift over a little bit, and I'll do some measurements to figure out how much to mill off, but that is in line with this pulley. So I think the measurements that we took and the milling that we did accommodated for that, but not the thrust washer being on the back side. So I can either choose to omit the thrust washer or use it, but either way we're on the right track. I just need to do a measurement so that we can start milling doing all the milling operations and mill this block. So I want to make sure I have all the measurements before we do any milling. So as you can see, with the thrust washer on the outside, whether I use it or not, you can see that this pulley and this pulley almost line up. We just need to take some off of that mounting block. But if we flip it around, you can see that it does not line up. Which, it spins great that way. Well, this is a little too tight. But if we go that route, we're almost a whole section of pulley off. So I need to, I'm not going to use the thrust washer. I'll put it on the outside, and that's what we're going to do. Time to get started with this. The first thing I'm going to do, because I'm going to be test fitting this to find out the final milling depth that I need to cut this block down to, is put the flats onto this raised boss so that I can tighten this on and off easier as I'm working with test fitting all these pieces. How I'm going to do that is use my ER 45/16 collet, and we'll get that fit in there, and we will mount this in a square collet block. So here's our ER40 collet block. We will get that mounted in the mill vise, and we'll do our flats for this shaft, and that'll be the first thing we do. We have our measurements. We're going to go with a 3/8. I know how much I'm going to take off of either side based off of some math. We're going to take off 68 thou off of either side to reach our 3/8 flats. A 5 thou test cut, and now we want to bring that thing down 68 thou, and then we'll flip it over and do the other side. There we go. We got our flats done. I've got this mocked up. This is how it's going to be installed. Thrust bearings on the outside. I've got my flats milled on the shaft so that I can tighten that up, and it spins quite nice. I'm going to grease this up once we have everything milled and ready to go, but I don't want to work with grease and all that right now. The idea then is we need to get this mounted on here, and this larger pulley section of the spindle bore needs to line up with the smaller pulley section on tensioner pulley. This surface and this surface is what we need to have lined up. That way these pulleys will line up. So I'm going to fiddle with this and get my measurement, and then we'll set this up in the milling table so that we can mill off this back side, and we'll come back over and do another test fit. I went ahead and measured, and I came up with, I did some math and did some calculations. I came up with about 30 thou to take off. We were thinking that we had to take off quite a bit more than that, but again, remember, I was measuring here and emailing those measurements and relaying those in video, and it's difficult to get measurements off of this thing. You measure in one spot, you could be 10 thou off from another spot. So we were kind of roughly guessing, but I thought, you know, we both agree that it's probably need to do some double checking and make sure our measurements are fine before we mill this block to depth, to final depth. So I was doing some looking, and it's about 1 rib, or almost a full rib of the pulley off. Now those are a little bigger than 30 thou. So I think I'm gonna have to take more than 30 thou off. So I don't overshoot it, I'm gonna start with 30 thou, and I'm gonna mill off 30 thou off of the block, and then we'll do another test fit and see where we are after that, and then we'll go from there. get this out of here, do a quick test fit, and see if we need to take off any more. I think we're close, but I feel like we're going to have to take off another 15 to 20 thou. .30 thou depth of cut, by the way. Machine's handling it pretty well. It's going real slow. I've got this milled down. We took about 80 thou off of that block, and these two pulleys are lining up, and I did a test fit with the belt. If we get that line down there, you can see that that is pushed up against there flush. Oops, there we go. So if I hold that there, this spins just like we anticipated, just like we wanted, and we've got our depth. So it's time to move on to the next operation, which is to drill and tap our hole so that we can mount this block to the machine. We've got our block milled to the final depth. We took off about 80 thou of the original thickness, and it lines up very well. I did a test fit. I just used a file to deburr these longer edges just so it wasn't so rough to handle. As we get closer, I'm going to just do a real light surface milling with an end mill on either end to clean up these edges, but otherwise this block is just going to be just fine the way it is. You can see where my end mill was chewing through there. It's pretty cool. I was actually able to use for an actual production real world project, I used my power feed on the x-axis. I'm really going to enjoy that. What a great upgrade. But you can see I put the flats on the shaft, and if we put this on here, it lines up very well. And I can tighten that down using a 3/8 wrench, and there's plenty of room back there for that. To get behind there so I'm not wallering out causing any issues with the pulley. This is a little proud, but it should ride in the slot, so it should not matter. If it is an issue, I will mill that shorter or turn it down later. But as you can see, this spins very nicely. There's no grease in there yet. I'm going to grease that up, like I said, when we're done. I can tighten this a little bit farther, and I'll fine tune that later, but there's no rock in this thing. This is going to be a much better design. The original pulley had this. Pretty sure it's an 8 by 125, but let's check it with our thread checker. 125, and if we check that, it is. Now this could be technically anything I wanted it to be for the mounting, the way that we're going to do it, but what I want to do is, this was sent, I've got plenty of this kind of stuff too, but this is a M8 125. My goal is to not modify any of the original components, so I plan on just leaving these alone, and I think that's gonna work out. Let's see if we can do this. To start with, there we go. So we got our spot where we're gonna drill and tap. We'll be able to continue on. Okay, we've got our block ready. Move some of this out of the way. I've got that test fit here. So this will mount on the lathe like this. And then of course I will screw the screw that Dave sent. But I'm gonna look around, or I looked around. I'd like to, rather than cut this one down, because I don't have the lathe working quite yet, I looked around to see if I had a shorter screw so that we could put that on there, and I found this one. Now it's quarter 20, or M8 125, sorry. Fits in there nicely. So the only problem is, I can use a screwdriver. I don't want to do that. So I'm gonna mill some flats into this screw as well. It's the perfect size. If we bring in this piece, which will be in there, once this is all set up, it will be mounted up like this. And that, when this is all tightened down, once I have it adjusted where I want it, then this piece will be tightened down. It's going to be a little short. I'm going to see if I have a longer one before I mill that. It's going to be just a little shorter than I want, because Yeah, I'm gonna see if I have a longer one. We may go back to cutting that down. The reason for that is I want to use not only a washer, but a lock washer on the back side of this so that it doesn't back off. And that way, once this is all mounted up, it's not gonna work its way loose and cause those pulleys to come loose. So I'm gonna try to find a longer one, and then what the idea will be to, put this thing in a collet and then mill some flats on this so I can use a wrench to tighten it down. I'm gonna see what else I have. Maybe I won't have to do this, but if I do, that's gonna be the next clip. You're gonna see me milling some flats in one of these. All right, we're gonna mill these flats. We're gonna take off 81 thou off of either side, and that will be good for the 7/16 wrench. I believe we have all of our milling operations done other than cleanup on the edges. But at this point, I'm ready to just test fit it onto the lathe before we come and clean up any of the edges. And let's just make sure that everything's gonna fit like it's supposed to, and then we'll finish everything else. But what we have is our mounting block, drilled and tapped for both the rod, the mounting rod, and my mounting screw, which I milled some flats in. I could always order a bolt or cut down the bolt that was sent to me, but this is what we're gonna go with for today. I'm gonna put in a flat washer, or a lock washer, and then a flat washer to help lock that in. We'll see if that holds. If it works its way loose, I might try Loctite. We have the pulley ready, the bushing for the back. So there's two needle bearings, one in the front, one in the back. So this pulley is now going to be supported on both ends, front and back. So that should really help prevent any of that wobble and that type of movement. This will mount through here to mount it to the block. This is our adjustment screw. That will go on here in between like that. There's a slot in the mounting plate where this is the adjustment. We're going to use that. And then finally, the thrust bearing goes on the outside along with the nylon locking nut to snug everything down. So we're going to go over to the lathe. We're going to mock all this up. We're even going to put the belts on. We're going to tighten everything up, turn it on, and make sure this thing spins and is going to work. And then we'll pull everything off. We'll finish milling the ends and make that piece nice and grease everything up, put it back on the lathe, and I'm going to turn some steel. First thing we'll do is put our mounting block in. It's going to go like this. Make sure I got the right size. Yep. There we go. Okay. So this little guy, we want that. I've got the screw with the washer, the lock washer, and then it's tightened into this block. It can move a little bit, but it will need snug down. The adjustment mechanism is going to be here, and it will go into that block. There we go. So we'll start there. We can always back that out if we need to. And then finally, our pulley will get mounted. And the first thing is this rod goes on here. There's the bushing with the needle bearing that we need to grease. That will ride in here. And finally, our thrust bearing will go on here. Very little play. Mock up and level up the motor pulley with the back of the tensioner pulley. That needs to go in farther. Boy, that's really close. That's pretty close. Spot on. I like it. That's belt number 1. There we go. And then we'll go up here. With any luck, everything's going to line up. So we have our belts on there. Now we just need to tighten it up before we can snug our bolt in the back. And to do that, we need to simply tighten up this tensioner. Oop, that's the guy. So I need basically this here, and we got to tighten this up. Give me a minute while we do that. This is the first test run since I got everything mounted. We've got our pulley, motor pulley lined up with the back. After all the milling on the block, everything is lining up really great. We've got our thrust bearing on there. I've got the tension adjusted. I've got the bolt on the back that mounts the block tightened up inside there. As you can see, our belts are lining up very nicely. I've not turned this on, but if we spin it by hand, everything seems to be running nicely. There's no wobble in this pulley. So what I'm ready to do is turn this thing on. Now, this isn't safe at all. I have the back panel exposed. If any chips are in there, that could be a problem. But I did blow that off. We're going to turn this on and do a test spin, and then we're going to take everything off. If everything looks good and sounds good, we're going to take everything off, finish milling that block, grease everything up, and do a final install. Then we'll do a test, do some test turning. Lathe's back on. Everything's tightened up, everything's where it should be. Controller board is on. Let's start out real low RPM, see what happens. $50 RPMs. I don't want to run this too long because there's no grease in there. It's looking great. One more time. And that's all I want to run that without any grease in there. But we did get up to 1100 RPMs. This thing's supposed to go to 1250, but with, you know, with certain tensions and everything, it can only go so fast. So the next thing to do is get this all taken apart, finish all the operations, grease everything up, and then do a final assembly. Okay. So we'll put a little oil up there. We'll bring it over a few thou. See if that cleans it up. double check. Looks like it did. Good. Very nice. Flip it over, do the other side. Let's take a final look at the part after I took over and finished the milling operations. We've got a deburred. We've got the 2 threaded and tapped holes for mounting. I've got my flats milled on the mounting rod. We got our thrust bearings. We've got our little bushing. I'm going to pack grease into this bearing and into that bearing, and I'll probably just shove some extra grease inside there anyway. Hopefully if it needs it, it can get to it. I'll just put it inside there, and I'll get as much grease into this one as I can. I don't want too much. I don't want this thing full. It'll probably start leaking out and making a mess later. So, but I do want to get some grease in there. I'll also pack grease into this thrust bearing, and we'll grease up the shaft and everything before we put it all together. That way everything's got lubricant when it's spinning, and I think we are ready to hopefully mount this thing onto the lathe once and for all, and hopefully for the last time. I'm ready to get my lathe back up and running. We've got everything put back together. I've got everything tightened down. Time will tell how well this is going to work, but we've got our belts on there. Everything's in alignment. Everything looks great. This pulley is tightened up. And I'm ready to put the cover back on. I'll give this one more quick spin so you can see this thing in action. Everything's lubed up with grease, so I'm not worried about burning those bearings up. So let's flip this on. I got the back panel covered up so it's safer. I got this out of the way. Let's make sure everything clears. There we are. So we're back in action. This looks a lot better. There's no noise coming from that pulley. And if we crank her all the way up, we got her up to 1140, 1160. Oh. 1220 RPMs. It's rated for 1250. I never run it that well. It's creeping up to 1250. I don't run it that fast. It's looking good. Well, it's back in action. Got her greased up, got it mounted. Everything's looking great in alignment. If we turn this on, give her a little speed. Everything looks good. I'm super excited to have this thing back so I can actually start working on some projects again. Looks good. Good setup. Well, I'll tell you, this is a bit of a saga, but I am really happy with this. Now that I got this cover on, listen to this thing. the chuck itself has that little clunking noise you hear. Somebody pointed this out in one of the other videos. Thank you for that, by the way. But it's these adjustment screws that are kind of, as they rotate, they drop and they make a little tiny noise. You can hear it here at slow speed. It's just these things. You can hear it. The chuck itself makes noises. So if we get rid of that, this thing's running great. Fantastic. So let's put some metal in here. I want to turn some chips. Let's grab scrap stock. Now let's see. Let's face this little piece off here. We're just going to face off the front of this, and we'll do a chamfer, and that's it. We'll close this video out. Are back in turning action. Excited. I'm glad to have my lathe back in operation. Well, I hope you enjoyed, everybody. I'm going to close the video out here. I'm done messing with the headstock and those bearings and those noises. Hopefully we got this problem licked, and we're going to be able to get back to projects. Thanks for watching.